In Whistler, they don't want to become another Fort McMurray. So, in the heavily wooded neighborhoods all around the community, there's an intensified effort to stop a future fire in its tracks.
If we have this break right up against the homes, we've got a better chance of stopping that house fire from going up the hill, which probably is a higher probability than a lightning fire. And we have protection from a fire coming down.
Bruce Blackwell is coordinating the fireproofing of Whistler. The fire ecologist has devised a plan of attack to clear trees, build fire breaks.
We're looking at the highest risk part of the community.
And map out natural defenses to give firefighters the advantage if a fire comes.
I think only in the last 3 or 4 years have we recognized just the magnitude of this problem. Fort Mac is not unique.
The Fort Mac area, where there's not a mountain in sight, might not appear to have all that much in common with the fancy chalets or Whistler's village stroll. But here too, there is only one road in and out. People live right next to the forest, and the economic consequences of losing this resort and its billion-dollar-a-year tourism business would spell disaster for all of BC. So, Blackwell's preparing for the worst.
Once a fire gets to a certain threshold of size and intensity, we don't have the ability to control it anymore.
Whistler has already had close calls. In 2009, the top of Blackcomb Mountain went up in flames. And last year, there was a huge wildfire in the next valley over in the Ilaho region.
It was shocking because, of course, you immediately think about your own town, and there are some similarities.
Nancy Willem-Morden, the mayor here, says every Canadian community in a high-risk fire zone has to do whatever they can do now to fight fires before they start.
It used to be hard, more difficult to convince taxpayers that fire smarting made sense, but we don't have that problem these days.
Whistler's fireproofing this spring is costing about $500,000. Most of that is from a fund set up by the BC government for fire mitigation that averages around $8 million a year. It's a paltry amount, say critics, when there's so much work to do.
After a decade of neglect, just 10% of that work that was considered high risk has been done, just 10%.
Whistler's done more fireproofing than most BC communities, and yet at this rate, it will still be more than 20 years before every neighborhood at risk is dealt with.
It's not their priority.
Robert Gray has consulted extensively on forest fires, especially about how much they cost. A report he wrote last year concludes we've dramatically underestimated the economic damage of fires. When you add in all the indirect and long-term costs that businesses and governments pay, Gray's report says the costs are much higher than the public is aware of. That same report says a California fire near Sacramento 3 summers ago cost $127 million to put out, but the long-term damage to water infrastructure in the area made the real cost closer to $1.8 billion.
We need to basically start looking at wildfires if it's floods or tornadoes or earthquakes. We need to put them in the same natural disaster category and fund mitigation the same way. We don't do that right now.
BC is spending $2.2 billion just to earthquake-proof schools. Gray says wildfire mitigation is just a fraction of that.
So the ratio is really out of balance. We need to be spending a lot more up front.
A warming climate has added to the urgency. Not only are forest fires becoming more costly, there are also more of them, and they're growing in frequency, says forestry professor Laurie Daniels.
The fire weather conditions are exactly on track for what has been projected. And so there's a lesson to be learned there. Looking forward to the future, we need to be better safeguarded. When I see Fort McMurray, I close my eyes and I see communities in BC who are highly susceptible and could be in the same situation this summer, next summer, 5-10 years from now. And if we don't adapt, if we don't protect ourselves, there'll be more Fort McMurrays, and there'll be many more of them if we don't start to act soon.
Once you have more than a handful of homes burning, you're not going to be successful in trying to stop that. So obviously, there's lots of places we can do more.
This spring in Whistler, there's only time and funding to fireproof this one neighborhood. Once the really hot weather arrives and the fire danger ramps up, the work has to stop. And everyone here will hope that it's been enough to prevent a disaster. Chris Brown, CBC News in Whistler.